We have a big panel of presenters today. So Dina, the floor is yours.
All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Deanna Chinnerman, and I'm a PhD student in this department, the Department of Family Medicine, under the supervision of Dr. Tracy Barnett. I'm one of the PGSS representatives this year on the FMGSS Council, and I'm your moderator for this session. So good to see you. Today, we're really privileged that we have a wide variety of speakers. Dr. Jeannie Haggerty is a professor in the Department of Family Medicine and holds a McGill Chair in Family and Community Medicine Research. She is co-director of the PRBN network with Dr. Peter Nugas, also an associate professor in this department and the Institute of Health Sciences Education. Dr. Neb Kovacina is the director of Quality Improvement Program in the Department of Family Medicine, a family physician and clinical teacher, and is involved with the practice and quality improvement in both the Quebec and Canadian colleges of family physicians. Dr. Najib Mukrawi, I hope I got that right, is the director and coordinator of the McGill PRBN network and is a general practitioner with a master's in clinical sciences. Lucie Lambert and Sonia Lucier are patient partners also involved in this initiative. So these intros are no means exhaustive due to the number of speakers we've got, but more complete bios are available if you'd like them. Today's research seminar is the importance of engaging patients in research and quality improvement, developing know-how. Please note that this seminar is being recorded, so feel free to turn your camera off if you don't want to be in the recording. And after the presentation, there will be a question period, so please raise your hand or type questions into the chat if you have. So, all right, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Deanna, and thank you also to Isabelle Vedel and Alexandre de Pocomondi, our research co-directors, for having us present in this seminar. We would like to start with a land acknowledgement. McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. And thank you all for joining us at this electronic meeting place and a series of crossings. As introduced, I'm Peter Nugas. I'm very pleased to be presenting here with my illustrious co-presenters from various perspectives in relation to patient partnership. So as Deanna introduced, myself along with Jeannie Haggerty and Najib Mukrawi were from the Practice-Based Research Network, or the PBRN. And the role of the PBRN is to foster collaborations among healthcare professionals and researchers. And what that means is striving to achieve a stronger culture of appreciation of research among healthcare professionals and the role of research in evidence-informed practice. And on the other hand, more practice-relevant primary care research among healthcare researchers, ultimately to benefit patients and citizens. The PBRN is part of a network funded by Réseau en Québec and also the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. So I'd like to humbly say at the beginning that we are part of a shared effort here in the Department of Family Medicine. There are a number of people who are contributing to bringing patients and citizens ever closer to the center of healthcare quality improvement and research. And that includes the people from CEAT-PRAM, the Community Information and Epidemiological Technologies, and PRAM, which stands for Participatory Research at McGill. Dr. Neil Anderson, the director of CEAT-PRAM, and colleagues including Dr. Anne Cockcroft are ever expanding the domain and reach of participatory research. Alex Macomba and Richard Budgell, our two Indigenous Studies professors in the department, guided us in a most stimulating reflection and discussion in our annual departmental retreat of how we might engage more Indigenous ways of knowing and learning, which have implications for community-based ways of knowing and learning. And Alex and Richard are engaging patients and community members in their research. And Tracy Barnett is doing the same. Dr. Barnett joined our department in recent times, and she's continuing her commitment and practice of patient engagement as the director of SPORE, that is the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. And that's to name a few. Okay, so to get us started, I will just present a few ideas, and I would like to say that this is from a literature review which Alexandra Smedmore, who's a psychology student and research assistant with us, put together. A central idea of patient partnership, the democratizing of research, bringing patients and citizens closer to the center of the action and the outcomes of healthcare research, is nothing about us without us. And it's a principle that derives inspiration from ideas of Indigenous learning and scholarship, and also from the global disability rights movement. A simple definition of patient partners is patients and their proxies who are directly involved as members of the research team, as opposed to merely being research participants. There's a vibrant discussion in the literature about appropriate terms and under what conditions. These include expert patients, clients, citizens, consumers, end users, and stakeholders. So I won't take you through this complicated diagram. We'll make our slides available. But there's the idea of different levels of engagement or involvement have been conceptualized. In this case by Manafort et al. 2018. And basically we have, for example, on one end of the spectrum, asking questions, being asked questions, all the way through to being primary decision makers about research or quality improvement. So looking at what the literature says about some challenges and barriers, some are logistical, including time, the lack of financial resources on the part of patient partners, physical access for people with disabilities, and retention of patient partners, particularly in studies, concerning pre-existing conditions, the lack of training and defined roles for patient partners, power imbalance between researchers or QI specialists and patient partners, and patient partner frustration with logistics, like why certain processes seem to take a long time in research or in academia, transportation, etc., team characteristics and group conflict, and emotional toll, or even burnout from both sides. Okay, so I'm going to present for the last couple of minutes just something from a researcher point of view. There can be seen to be a tension between what sort of research we want to do and engaging patient or consumer partners in research. And there is a risk that we could succumb to neoliberalization, in research. And what that basically means is that the research becomes subsumed into the market economy rather than the other way around. In the market economy, seeing as like a dimension of the broader society that we are a part of. And what happens and ideally what happens under neoliberalism is that we lose our or we suppress our critical capacities that are important and vital in a vibrant and viable democracy. And that's why there is there has been suggestions that people should not talk about theory, for example, in research, to make it more accessible. But what I'd like to suggest is that when we're doing research, we can still make language accessible and even ideas accessible, but it still needs to have theory, the component that makes research unique and what it is, and makes a unique contribution in a complex society. And so research quality is still something that's important and doesn't need to be compromised. In fact, will be strengthened, because the ideas that come from patient partners will actually help build the ideas that are actually necessary to make research valid and transferable to other research settings beyond this research setting and populations in which research is conducted. And I'd like to just emphasize that with a quote that I really like from Anne Macaulay. Anne was the was the founder of PRAM, Participatory Research at McGill. Thanks to, speaking of joint efforts, to Andrea's Dib, who actually tracked down this exact quote, since it's been a long time since I've been at 58 Chemin de la Côte de Neige. And I used to like gazing at this poster above one of the photocopiers, and Andrea rescued the exact wording for me. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, Anne Macaulay. One of the key items is to keep scientific rigor, because shoddy research doesn't benefit anybody. It certainly doesn't benefit the community. Increasingly, the engagement of patient partners has become an expectation. There are increasingly sophisticated tools available to facilitate this, such as the patient-centered, the framework for engagement in research and QI put forward by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in Washington, DC. And it's increasingly become a formal expectation for funding agencies like the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and as indicated by the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. Okay, so I will now hand over to Neb, who's the Director of Quality Improvement and a family physician at St. Mary's Hospital. Thanks, Neb.
Thank you. Maybe if you can stop sharing the screen so I can just, perfect. So I can share my presentation. Okay, so I'm not gonna go, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to just talk quickly about patient engagement and quality improvement and some kind of basic principles that at least here at McGill we were trying to cover when we did some training for our teams at the different GMFUs that are in the McGill network. So just for everyone to be to understand a little bit the concept behind quality improvement is really trying to achieve the quadruple aim in healthcare services. And one of them being patient experience. That's almost kind of a number one aim, because all improvements that we're trying to do in healthcare services, we are trying to really improve the patient health and patient experience of the healthcare service. There's also some misconceptions in quality improvement that I would like to bring up in terms of patient engagement. For example, the statement that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That absolutely we need to have kind of a quantitative result in terms to prove the improvement, which is in some sort of misconception, because we have a lot of qualitative information we can get and reflection to do regarding the improvements. So it's one of the reasons why the the famous PDSA cycle was actually modified to PDSA, which means study. In the past, it used to be check, which was really kind of a limiting in terms of the interpretation. Why the word study means more reflect and learn from the cycle itself, rather than just check the indicator. So it's really important in the quality improvement also to use the stories, speak with our patients, contemplate on the actions that we're doing, and also collect qualitative data. For example, there's a lot of things that we cannot easily measure, so we have to find ways to get that feedback as well. For example, how do we measure the relationship that we have with patients? How do we measure outputs such as shared decision making, which is very important in our everyday practice. So quality improvement was seen a lot through the lens of a product dominant model in the past, where basically quality improvement was based a lot on the other industries, where we had this kind of a customer product relationship, where we as doctors, we are giving some sort of a product to the customer who is a patient, while in fact now we are thinking more and more about service dominant model of thinking, where healthcare service is composed of a relationship and an action. So when we have a relationship between a health professional who's exploring a patient need, we have a relationship which is a key to the agreement and to the shared actions that might follow, such as procedures, drugs, treatments, and so on. So very important concept in quality improvement. And the model that seems to be really inclusive of that idea is to have the patient aim together with the generalizable science-informed practice, so meaning a best practice, evidence-based practice, that we take together with the patient aim applied to a certain particular context, clinical context, and then we have a measurable improvement. So by patient aim here, the concept is really to find the reason, a reason for seeking help from patient perspective that's grounded in the reality of patient life. We have to make sure that the circumstances surrounding that aim are brought up. For example, a well patient might have a different requirements for a co-produced service than a sick one. So it's very important to know which type of patients are we talking about. And also when we talk about the measurable improvement, we are really trying to assess the degree to which that this patient aim was understood and achieved. So to take the patient aim into account, as well as the effect of the scientifically informed intervention, for example, putting in place some sort of clinical guideline, the recent evidence-based finding, and we are also taking that into account with the patient perspective. So it really has to be a balanced set of measures that we are looking at both aspects. If we look at the model that I'm talking about, more like a service-oriented model, so this is a kind of a typical double diamond diagram that's used for that. And as you can see here, it's separated in four categories. So discover, define, develop, and deliver. And it's really at the level, different levels that the patients can be involved and should be involved. For example, in the first part where we talk about discovery, so basically defining what the problem is, it's important to be empathetic, listen to the patient, and basically look for the problem together with the patient. Once we define the specific problem, what we call the SMART aim in quality improvement, then we need patients as well to test these prototypes or these ideas for a change and improvement. So that's where the PDSA cycle takes place. And that's also where the patient can be involved if we have to take their impression and their improvement experience with these interventions or changes that are put in place. So this is just kind of a quick diagram to give you an example. And what we discussed in terms of practicalities of implementing patient engagement and quality improvement is to have some sort of patient involvement statement where we would kind of, with our teams, building quality improvement projects, really explicitly write down what we would like to involve the patients in. So for example, here, describe that we were going to involve patients in a specific project in order to inspire, understand, validate. So find what we want to have as a feedback from a patient regarding the expected outcome. So for example, here, I just went with the first thing in my head. So if we want to involve patients in a quality improvement project on implementation of an online booking system, we would like to involve them to validate that the changes that are aligned to patient needs and they are not an obstacle for vulnerable populations to access care. So it gives us kind of an objective towards which we're looking at with the patients, and also defines also what type of patients do we want. So if we really try to achieve that we don't create an obstacle for vulnerable patients, well, by implementing these changes, we should probably go and seek feedback from vulnerable populations and their families rather than assigning just any patient in this project. So it kind of gears teams towards what type of patient do we want to participate in this project. So this is just an example that we did in our workshop to help the teams choose good patient partners. That's all for me.
Okay, I think this is my turn. So we should change, I'll ask you to change lenses because I'll talk from an experiential viewpoint as a patient partner. Why and how did I end up as a patient partner? I'll briefly talk about my motivations and my experience and challenges I met on the PBRN and draw some conclusions. After retiring as a prof at the college level, my interactions with the health system were more frequent, and this generated a lot of frustrations. I realized I had to become actively involved in the management of my health and not be a passive recipient, an object. Something had to be improved in the health system. My life experience, my beliefs have taught me that social change is not the product of spontaneous generation, if I may use a concept. And for me, patient partnership would be a tool to implement this process of change. So I did some investigation, research, readings, etc. And a few years ago, literally recruited myself on the PBRN. At the first meeting, I met very interesting and welcoming people. We had regular meetings where various issues related to research in the health field were discussed. Some challenges I met, though, were, first of all, understanding and defining my role as a patient partner on the PBRN. Another one was getting the information and the documents early enough. Since I'm not part of the loop, that is the family medicine structure, a lot was foreign to me. I prepared for the meetings and listened a lot, but my interactions only took place during the meetings. Third, learning a new paradigm and a new language and new concepts and new acronyms. See, I refer you to Peter's presentation, for example. Sorry, Peter. Although the discussions concerned research, which I'm familiar with, the concept was different from what I knew. I'm trained as a social scientist and spent my working life in the educational field. Another challenge was asking questions. For example, I had no idea what deferred access referred to during a presentation and did not dare ask what it meant during the presentation. Everyone seemed to know, and I asked someone at the end of the meeting. Giving good, sensible, and accurate feedback was another challenge. For example, at a PBRN meeting, a clinician researcher from outside of the McGill network did a presentation on a research project he wanted to conduct in one of our clinics. I asked him, but what's in it for the patient of McGill clinics? What will they get out of this? And he seemed surprised by the question. He couldn't answer. In retrospect, I think that all of us on the PBRN didn't have a clear idea of the role of a patient partner at first, but slowly I became more comfortable in voicing a patient voice and using my sociological imagination and professional expertise. As a committee, we all have to work to do this, this in order to build a workable and rich partnership. This is known as co-design. As I've grown as a patient partner, I have drawn some conclusions, which I will try to go on briefly. If the voice of the patient isn't reflected in some way in research or quality improvement, what's the purpose of the research? Why do research? Is it meant to be for a small number of people who will read the results in scientific magazine publication? Or is it to sit on the shelf or in the drawer? Or is it meant to improve healthcare? And who is meant to benefit from this health research? It's also important that the engagement of patients isn't just tokenistic. It must be genuine engagement from all members of the group. For example, I have a friend who had been a patient partner on a research committee. She said that people didn't seem to pay attention to her. Precisely, often when she started speaking, some members would start using the telephone to text messages or read something else, or to read their emails. She resigned. A basic but essential thing to do for engaging patients is to make the language accessible. This is important not only for clinical language, but for research language. And often language can be very technical. Not making the language accessible could really exclude patient partners. In addition, it's also important to treat patients as an equal partner. Even if they don't have the formal knowledge of the researchers or the healthcare professionals, they have the different knowledge of living with their condition or sharing specific social characteristics, which is just as valuable. And after recruiting and selecting a person to be a patient partner, it's very important that there's some training involved. Although one doesn't need a PhD, the patient needs to have some health literacy in the research subject. The absence of a patient voice is evident in obvious way for quality improvement. And I was thinking about the fact that when the MUHC and the SHIM opened, I don't know if you remember, this came into the in the newspapers and etc. There were no appropriate doors for patients with reduced mobility, and it was fixed after the fact. But had patients been consulted in the design of the building? Obviously, there's also practical benefits for the researcher. The patient partner can ask questions like, do you really need focus groups? Is it enough to do interviews? Are the questions truly user-friendly? Patient partners can also ensure that during the publication, the language of the document will be accessible to non-researchers and non-health professionals. And I also sometimes like to imagine that patient partners could help to think outside of the box. One really strong argument for engaging patients in research or in quality improvement is that it makes the research relevant to patients. Our societies intend to promote self-management on one's health. And if we want people to be able to manage their own health, they should make patients part of their team. Researchers and health professionals should make patients out of a part of their team. This will make a research more relevant and applicable, and therefore there will be greater acceptance and uptake of research results. And finally, there are many other reasons to engage patients in research and quality improvement. They're experts on their conditions. There's a unique knowledge base that only comes from the personal experience with a particular illness or social situation. Taking into account can have practical benefits in quality improvement initiatives, such as medical compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So all in all, I strongly believe that patient partnership is a new paradigm that has to be integrated in research and quality improvement. So thank you very much, Jeannie and Sonia.
Hey everyone, my name is Sonia Lucier. I'm a patient partner with Dr. Jeannie Haggerty at the Research Center in St. Mary's Hospital. My purpose here today, I would like to talk to you about what it is to be a patient partner, what's our responsibility as a patient partner in order maybe for you to recruit the right patient partner for your project. So a little bit of history here. I became a patient partner to give back after a long disease and to share what I had learned, basically. So as a young cancer patient, 29 years old, stage 4 cancer, I was very, very determined to heal and to fight this cancer. And that's how I became a partner of my own care, which is the base of being a patient partner, right? After the treatment, many years of treatments and a bone marrow transplant, I had to reflect on my life, what I had lived, what I had learned in order to find a new path in life, just to find something else, like reorganize my life. So that's how I reflected on the experience of all these years and went forward to the experience, which brought me to resilience. And I think resilience is the main key of being a patient partner, where you have to see what was behind and be able to build what's ahead of you. And will give you, with the resilience, the distance and the objectivity to see the world or the situation or the project with a little bit a wider angle, and not just your own glasses on what your story is, but what your story is within the big context. So to me, that's the base of being a patient partner. After that, I will share my screen to this slide here, which will show you, it comes from the Direction Collaboration Patient Partenaire at University of Montreal, who have actually developed a great sense of what it is to be a patient partner, how to recruit patient partners. And you have here the 3 levels. First level is what I've been talking about, my own experience, how to how to be with my own experience and live it. The second part of being a good patient partner is being able to explain your own situation in a pedagogical way in the right context, and be able to listen. Listen is a very important part, because if you can listen, that means you've taken a step back from your own experience, which is the only way you can be a good patient partner. Having communication skills, of course. And the last one I would bring is being reflexive about what you've learned, being self-aware of what you've learned, where you are, what you're living right now. The third step is more a leadership step. I'm not going to talk about it, which can come later. But the first two wheels here are necessary to be a good patient partner, and for you to have a patient partner that will be valuable in your project. So talking about self-awareness, I'm a patient partner at Université de Montréal with all the health students who have to do a 3-year course on how to integrate a patient partner in their care of the patient. And I was asked to talk about my experience as a patient, but also as a caregiver. And somebody mentioned you can be a patient partner and being a caregiver. So I was a caregiver of my parents, recently deceased parents. So I told my experience as a patient, but as a caregiver. After the session, I asked myself, okay, was I a good patient partner today? I was, but probably my glasses hadn't been changed enough as far as being a caregiver. It was too close to me to be able to express it in a way that was very useful for the students. So the self-awareness is super important, to be able to step back from the situation and say, okay, what should I say? How do I say it? And how will I get understood the best by people who are around the table? Because at the end, that's the important part, right? Is for people around the table to be able to understand what you're saying. So we talked a lot about roles, and I was really pleased to see that Dr. Kovachina has a patient involvement statement, because I think the role of a patient has to be shared by the patient partner, but also by everybody around the table or in the project. So it's very important to know, and for other people to know, that I'm not an advocate of a group of persons. I don't represent interest. I'm not there to criticize the health system. I'm there to convey my experience in a tangible way, so people understand what I've gone through, what I've lived, and then we can co-create together. So the distinction is important, and I think it's important to understand what the role at the base is of the patient partner. So I hope this gives you a little bit of an understanding of this shared responsibility that we have as a patient partner to know our own self, and for the professionals to understand where we're from, where we're coming from, and so we can keep moving forward. And if I can leave you with one saying that a physician who works with us said, he said, well, patient partners' words can be disturbing as they challenge the path that we've drawn, and we have to be able to understand and to hear that. So I will leave my words with that, and then leave Dr. Haggerty to keep going. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And in fact, I will give you the last word because I think that that's the way it should be. But I really want to just talk about my growing experience working with patient partners, but particularly sort of maybe diving into how Sonia and I began to collaborate, because I think that it sort of begins to illustrate the journey that Peter talked about earlier, about moving from, just seeking input at the beginning to an actual collaborative partnership. So Sonia and I got to know Sonia when we were doing a project in Montérégie where we were working with local decision makers and clinical leaders and so on to identify problems of access to primary health care and specific vulnerable populations that were affected by that. And so we had a multi-stakeholder partnership that we were establishing at the table. And we, by principle, wanted to have a, ideally a member of a vulnerable community there, but we thought at least we'll have a patient partner. So I was able to reach out to what at the time was the Centre d'Excellence de Patients Partenaires, Université de Montréal, and they had a bank of patients. And so, we identified Sonia. So Sonia came and joined our comité de pilotage as we were sort of talking about this whole process. So Sonia was sitting at the table on an equal level with all these other partners, although I don't think that we always allowed room for her as an equal partner, like retrospectively. But she was really there kind of as a placeholder to represent the voice of the patient and to speak the voice of the patient in key occasions. But our intent was always to get like a member of the vulnerable population. I have to say that Sonia's presence at the table changed the conversations. So they kept reminding everybody that this was about the patient. Ultimately, there was all these institutional things going on, 2 different CSIS and all that kind of thing. But Sonia always reminded us that ultimately it was about the patient. When we finally moved over to kind of identifying our vulnerable population where we were focusing on, Sonia retired from the committee and we invited, it's very difficult to recruit vulnerable patients. And so we recruited the director of a community organization to represent the patient. And I just have to say that that was not as successful because we were not hearing the direct experience and voice of the patient. We were hearing it too indirectly. When our project finished, actually the intervention that we did was we used volunteer-based patient navigators that would call up socially vulnerable patients and just help them attach to primary care off the centralized waiting list for patients and just generally provide information kind of on a peer-to-peer basis about how the system works and what they needed to do to show up and to prepare for their visit. And we were able to demonstrate really good effects. So we decided to spread this. And when Sonia heard that we were now in the process of spreading the intervention, she actually contacted us to get more information. And we ended up hiring her as a member of our team, as a patient partner and as a member of our team. So, and that's worth saying something, that when patient partners come, just as you've heard from Lucy, they actually come often they're whole people, first of all, but they often have their own skill set that they bring to the table, in addition to their experience and knowledge as a patient. So, and sometimes it can be very interesting to have those 2 things happening, but it becomes very important to have the reflex to say, as a patient, I feel this, or from my communication perspective, I feel that. So Sonia had experience in communication and translation, so she's become a really valuable member of our committee, but she also has this reflex as a trained patient partner to say, speaking as a patient, da, 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 da. So it's very, very helpful to have somebody who has that reflex. Sonia has been absolutely critical. I just want to talk about some of the ways that she's been critical on our project. When we are reaching out to new partners for our project, to extend our project, it's very powerful to arrive as a researcher-patient dyad, because it reminds everybody that this is not about a publication in JAMA one day. It's really about doing something that puts things forward for the patient. I think that creates trust right from the beginning. And I think that this week we had a talk about the Indigenous perspective, and one of the speakers said something that we have to be always reminded that none of us is experts in anybody else's lives. And I think that sometimes as clinicians and researchers who work on patient-oriented research, we sometimes actually begin to think that we know patients because we know what the mean or the average is or something like that. And Sonia has often in our meetings really reminded us that actually we don't know what the patient experience is. So a physician will say something like, why would we need a navigator program? We tell patients everything they need to know when they come to see us in the office. And Sonia can say, let me speak as a patient. As a patient, you have no idea how difficult it is to capture everything that's said in a visit. It's so helpful to have somebody remind you or advocate for you. You have no idea how difficult it is to pick up the phone and do something. You have no idea how difficult it is to actually change behavior. So that perspective has always been very powerful. And I would say that Sonia, as a communications expert, has been critical for our communications, but not just as a communications expert, but anything that is destined to patients. She really helps us not just get the language right, but the underlying assumptions. So for instance, things that are destined around self-management, she will question the assumptions around that what are you expecting? Look at everything that you're expecting the patient to do. How are you helping? So it really can help us question our own assumptions. And then finally, I wanted to say that as I've worked with Sonia, we've really moved into the collaborative stage, I think. Sonia, I'd like to get your input on that, but just most recently, Sonia was included on a CIHR grant as a collaborator. And I have to say that as a reviewer on CIHR grants, I'm seeing this more and more. And it might be helpful for you to know that as a collaborator, as a patient partner on my grant, she had to submit a CV and most significant contributions, just like any other member of the team did. And these are scrutinized by the peers at the CIHR level. Not scrutinized, but we do read them, so they're really important. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our kind of walk together and my growth from getting to the point now where from an initial starting point of saying, yeah, this is something we have to do on basis of principle. And then I was so thankful for the kind of support that the Université de Montréal has allowed us to be able to sort of involve patients on a, what do we call them, on an ad hoc basis, and then gradually moving towards towards really making it part of the way that we do business. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Sonia, maybe for the final word.
I would just say thank you, Jeannie, for all that. I would just want to say that, yes, as a patient partner, we've lived it. So it's intrinsically in ourselves to know what it is. But at the same time, we're sometimes speaking from our gut feeling, So we have the responsibility to react in a proper way. And the professional side, you have the responsibility to hearing us and make the most of it and adapt it to how it can be adapted in the context, So I think the scientific aspect of it versus the emotional aspect have to sort of go together to move forward and co-create together. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. So we have 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So please raise your hand or put them in the chat, and we're really happy to hear them. It's been a really great speech. Pascaline, I think. Did I get your name right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, my question is about the comment, so the Isabel comment concerning, in my experience with patients and caregivers, engagement in research is the key to agree on expectations. That's why I asked if we can have some articles, paper because I am interested to the relationship and the specific expectation concerning each stakeholders during their interventions.
I just know from a couple of the models that I presented earlier on, I could forward that on. I'll make a note if you want to just, drop your email address in there, because I haven't met you, Pascaline, sorry. So, I can forward on a couple of those models at least, which, are fairly detailed in terms of expectations and roles that have been quite thought through. And I'll have a closer look at the literature review that we have as well to see if there's anything useful, and others may have, other contributions.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just, maybe before another question, I just want to say, I think expectations are really important. I also think it's just important to just do it. I think you won't get it all right from the very beginning. And I think that you just start doing it and then you learn as you go. It's about establishing a respectful relationship that allows you both to learn together.
Yeah, some of the projects too that I have participated in, you have like more than one patient partner, and sometimes to have two sides, it's interesting as well.
Mark Yaffe.
Michelle Wilczewski. Sorry, I think I got your name right.
Hi, Deanna.
then-
Yeah, I was your instructor for lit reviews. Remember?
Well said, Michelle, well said.
I won't be involved. Okay, I have a question. So I recently had an experience. It was my first time trying to engage patient partners, and I joined a Facebook community of patients with long COVID in Canada, because we are developing a research protocol, and we wanted to make sure that patients with lived experience with the disease would be part of the development process in a real participatory approach. And what happened was a PhD who was a member of the group reported me to IRB at McGill for conducting research without ethical approval. So I ended up speaking to IRB, and my explanation seemed to be enough. But is there, are there appropriate ethical procedures to follow when beginning the patient engagement process?
Michelle, I can't answer that question, but I think that part of that also speaks to the dual role that patient partners come in as. And I think that sometimes it's really important for them to, this is where I think it's really important to say, I'm speaking as a patient partner, I'm this, or speaking as a PhD, somebody who's doing research, I'm questioning this. And I think that when those two pieces get conflated, I think it becomes really difficult because it assumes a power. Do you know what I mean? Like it can sometimes be a very powerful comment that taints a whole conversation. So
But
I don't know. I think that, I mean, we have the right to consult, I think, and to, yeah, Carolyn is the expert on this, but we have the right to consult.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Peter just said, okay, so just that was my recent experience. It's, try to do the right thing and end up getting in trouble, but we'll carry on.
All right, I see a hand.
Can I just speak to that before you go on to the other topic? Crucial, you absolutely have the right to consult. I would reinforce the CIHR ethics to, like, the ethics life cycle documents on, like ethics and research. They have the very first thing is to establish your partnership, right? As CIHR's life cycle of ethics, to learn things and then translate the knowledge reinforces that. And your ethics guidance from the Tri-Council policy statement reinforces that too. So that you were in the right, and the ethics committee needs to, I'm glad that you got through that okay. That's disappointing that they spoke to you that way.
All right, Richard Vajel, your turn.
Hey.
You've waited long enough.
And Mark,
hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I find this approach fascinating, and its possible iterations and uses in patient physician relationships. Something that struck me in the presentations, though, was the kind of absence of a discussion of culture of the patient. In my case, I'm talking about Indigenous cultures and Inuit in particular. I think that is an overlay that is, that may not be visible and may not be, we may not be always conscious of, but it is omnipresent. It is always there. And, you know, I mean, I can speak from my own experience. I had never had a professional relationship with a physician who comes from the same culture as me. So I am always doing the cultural work to inform that person about that professional, about my background and where I'm from. I just did it with a new dentist this week, you know, so I'm very accustomed to doing that kind of thing, but that places a particular kind of burden on a patient frequently. And I think the level, if we think about Inuit who come to Montreal for treatment from Nunavik, I think the degree of cultural estrangement that those patients are coming with cannot be overestimated. Like I think frequently their degree of estrangement from the health system that they find themselves in is enormous. So recruiting people like that as a partner, it's almost laughable because the gap is so wide. So I think we need to start thinking about how can we shrink that gap, that degree of estrangement, because the concept of partnership, of assisting people in, helping them to become participants in the management of their own health, it's fundamental, and it relates to traditional cultures. Before the arrival of Western medicine here, that's how people viewed health. They saw themselves as active participants, and we want to be able to work to recapture that kind of thing. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
So we have two more questions, Mark Yaffe and then AM.
Thank you. My question is actually to Lucy. Lucy, you made reference to the difficulties that arise when the vocabulary around the table is not a familiar one. And this is something that as a family physician, we historically struggle with, because our specialist colleagues urge us to use terminology that we try and avoid using with our patients, and as a way of leveling the playing field and making sure people understand what's being said. My experience around research tables, when we have had patient participants, patient collaborators, is often a blank face, not surprisingly, as things are being discussed. Do you have suggestions for what process is needed to ensure that patient participants, collaborators, are adequately oriented to the vocabulary, or how the vocabulary can be changed from the beginning to ensure that one is using a common communication?
Well, I think that Sonia alluded to that a little bit. Of course, if you're going to have a patient partner on a research team, either as a researcher or as a participant, like feedback type, the giving feedback, this patient has experience and knowledge about the issue that's going to be dealt with, be it a vulnerable person, like in Jeannie's project, or someone living with diabetes, or someone who, if you're talking about quality improvement and communicating with patients, like a letter welcome and that sort of thing, you got to take into account the fact that people don't necessarily have computer literacy, et cetera, et cetera. So the selection, the patient partner will be selected according to specific criteria. I personally would not be able to sit on a research team or with a research team on cancer, because I have not lived with it. Okay, so there is that kind of how would I say, criteria when working with patient partners and selecting patient partners. Now, about the technical aspects, or that sort of thing. I mean, there's some training to be done. Clinicians, for example, as far as I know, are not necessarily research experts, but then they work with research experts. And so there might be some sort of dialogue between clinicians and research experts. So that sort of dialogue and interface can take place with the patient partner. There has to be training too, of course. So when you will train, when you will select a patient partner for your research, well, there are criteria to be met. And, you know, not everybody just walking on the street can be a patient partner on any research project, but maybe Sonia should complete that.
I think you have to give yourself time, you know, I mean, in both sides, you know, as a patient partner, you can't just sit at a table and understand everything. And that's not what Lucie's saying, of course, but I think you have to give yourself time, give them reading, involve them from the beginning as much as you can. I think these are win-win situation, I think. Yeah, and I think Neb might have mentioned too, you can have a patient partner that goes from the beginning and then have other patient partners come in for specifics, you know, that will come with a new look at your project as well. But yeah, I think reading from the beginning, giving yourself time, I think these are the things to do. And as a patient partner, you have to ask questions, you know. Yeah.
You think last question of the day. I see a hand.
Did Alex?
Is that me?
Yeah, that's
Oh,
you.
hi. Yeah, hi. I am Alex. Thanks for that. Thank you. Thank you for the interesting presentations and the discussion here. I'd just like to put up a few comments, I guess, as opposed to a specific question. Just some observation on things that I heard, and I might have heard some things not in full context. So my apologies. I don't intend to cause any negative feeling towards anyone, but just some of the points. Key when we're talking about engaging patient partners, and I work with on 2 different patient partner projects inside the SPORE, but also working with communities and Indigenous peoples, Indigenous communities, or any communities. The first essential is about building relationships. You know, the clinicians, there's a whole conversation around health professional relationships with patients, and that it needs to be built. So too with researchers on the research inside a whole research project. Now, building that relationship needs to happen, and it needs to happen from the community perspective, which means that we as researchers, and I mean, as an Indigenous scholar, I'm also have to follow those same things when I'm going to a Cree, if I'm going to a Creek community, Anishinaabe community, because they're not Haudenosaunee, they're not Ganyankahaga, and that's what I know, that's where I come from. So it's about then, we as researchers need to then learn and understand who they are, where they come from, and what's the things about them. So it's that homework before, because we then have to know how do we go and establish that relationship. And one of the elders who works with us, who several of us here know, Amelia McGregor from Ganawage, she says you use your 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. That's why the creator made it that way. That's her interpretation of that. We go and listen and understand, and then we can ask those respectful questions to help clarify. Yesterday, there was a wonderful symposium, or Wednesday, with Global Health, and 2 Indigenous physicians, Dr. Veronica McKinney and Dr. Karen Hill, both spoke about the importance as clinicians of having those relationships. If I go to see a patient and I end up with the family and I'm there for 2 hours, that's what we have to do as Indigenous physicians. And yes, that's an ideal setting. I get that. But it's also then as researchers of moving in that direction. One of the comments I heard about the patients and how we're going to engage them, I kind of read that as kind of we'll pick and choose how we'll engage the patient into the research. And going back to the principles around CPPR, we know that ideally it needs to be from the very beginning. We have a research question idea and we want to work with Ganawagi. Well, you got to come to Ganawagi and say, we got this idea. What do you think about it? Are you interested in something like this? And after the conversation, what started out here as the research idea might end up being here as the actual project, because the community's input, whether it's indigenous or not, you know, urban, people of color, religion, they're the expert. And so therefore we have so much to learn as researchers about then creating and supporting the creation of projects that really will be contributing to the community wellness, which then means that it's not only a patient orientation in understanding research, the research project, the research language, but researchers also getting the orientation and education to understand the patient partner language, the community language, the vernacular, and working that we have to then bring whatever kind of science we're bringing into and be able to talk that in plain speak. And yeah, we can then go back and write the big worded stuff, but also know that we have to have versions in the vernacular if we're going to indeed be inclusive and respectful of the patient partners. And then finally, one of the comments around the partners and bringing in a partner into a project, that's so threatening. It is so threatening to be someone out of the community, out of the streets, and being asked to go and sit in with a bunch of people that have got all kind of letters after their name, you know, that are in the ivory towers of the institution. And that's the community mindset, often looking that way. I don't know what to say. I've got nothing to say. I've heard that so many times. And man, oh man, when you go in and put the question out and just sit down and shut up and listen to the stories that are being told, wow, you talk about learning stuff in some cases that you never expected to hear and learn about, that not only is affecting the project, but ideally is affecting us individually as researchers, but also as human beings. Thanks. I wanted to share those things out there with the best of intention. Now go on. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. There have been some really fascinating opinions and questions, and I think we've all learned a lot. So thanks to everyone, the speakers, and everyone who asked questions. Our next session is on the May 14th, and it's the Primary Care for Elderly People, a Career Trajectory of the Academic Family Physician, presented by Dr. Vladimir Kennesov. So tune in if you can, and have an amazing weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.